To you all. This morning, the focus of this presentation will be on the nutrient requirements and intakes of infants aged 0 to 2 years. This is a time when rapid growth is occurring and nutrient energy needs peak, with the highest requirements of the entire lifespan occurring in this age bracket. The infant's nutrition not only has immediate impacts on its growth short term, but contributes to long-term growth and health outcomes due to its effect on the development of bodily organs. These infants begin being heavily dependent on their mothers for breast milk or to be bottle-fed formula, and as they grow, they develop a sense of independence and leave this age group capable of feeding themselves and consuming foods like what the rest of their family would be consuming. Now, when preparing this presentation, I found that there is very limited research available on the dietary intake of infants. While some data exists on rates of breastfeeding and average ages of introduction of solid foods in Australia, there is poor data on food and associated nutrient intakes, since half the food consumed by infants and toddlers ends up on the floor, and therefore the actual amount consumed is difficult to measure. The sources that I have used in this presentation include data from the 2010 Australian National Infant Feeding Survey. This is a credible government-based source and provides the most up-to-date authoritative information and statistics on the prevalence and duration of breastfeeding in Australia and other infant feeding practices. The study was conducted on 52,000 children who were randomly selected Australia-wide, and hence provides data which is well generalisable for most infants in Australia. Additionally, it also contains data from a study on food and beverage intakes in Australian children aged 12 to 16 months. This study included food intake data for 551 children. However, it has several limitations, such as the fact that it is a 24-hour recall and thus provides limited data on their usual intake. There was also a high potential for carers of this age group to overestimate energy intake due to food spillage not being considered and parents wanting to appear as though their child was eating adequately even if they weren't. It also failed to provide nationally representative data, reducing its ability to be generalisable. However, since no other data on the food intake of this age group is available, this data will be used to provide some insight into the food groups consumed in this age group. However, it should be taken into consideration with caution. There is also data from the Australian Dietary Guidelines on the recommended number of serves of each food group for infants aged 1 to 2 years. This was used because these recommendations are based on the best available research about food and nutrition and provide simple and accurate information about the amounts and types of foods which should be consumed daily to promote health and reduce the risk of disease within this age group. In moving on, the World Health Organization's recommendation is that infants should be exclusively breastfed for the first 6 months of life. Thereafter, to meet their evolving nutrient requirements, infants should receive nutritionally adequate and safe complementary foods while breastfeeding continues up to 2 years or beyond. So based on this, what are breastfeeding rates like in Australia? The available evidence from the 2010 Australian National Infant Feeding Survey suggests that the rate and duration of breastfeeding has increased significantly over the past decade. 96% of infants are exclusively breastfed at birth. However, this rate declined significantly to 61% at less than 1 month, 39% at less than 4 months, and 15% at less than 6 months. Additionally, the rates of children predominantly breastfed each month after birth was slightly higher than for those exclusively breastfed. This is unfavourable given that exclusive breastfeeding is recommended for the first 6 months of life. Furthermore, only 22 to 28% of mothers tended to breastfeed at all after 12 months of age. In contrast, 40% of infants aged 1 month received non-human milk or infant formula. This rate rises to 55% at 6 months and 80% at 12 months. So what are the implications of these findings? The evidence suggests that those who are breastfed experience a range of health benefits over those who aren't, due to the bioactive factors present in breast milk such as immunoglobulins. Given that the diet of the mother is nutritionally adequate, the infant should be able to obtain all the nutrients that it requires for growth and development during its first 6 months of life from breast milk alone. Additionally, the bioactive substances in breast milk can protect against infection in infants by providing both passive and active immunity. Breastfeeding has also been found to reduce the risk of type 1 and type 2 diabetes, celiac disease, irritable bowel disease, asthma, allergy, and acute lymphocytic leukemia. Breastfed infants also have a reduced risk of becoming obese in childhood, adolescence, and early adulthood compared with formula-fed infants due to the lower protein content in breast milk. There is also suggestive evidence of breastfeeding being protective against risk factors for heart disease. Now, moving on to the introduction of solid foods, it is recommended for this to take place at around 6 months of age, with no benefits if introduction occurs before this age. Data from the 2010 Australian National Infant Feeding Survey found that the average age of introduction of solid foods was around 4.7 months. The first foods introduced to an infant should be ones which are high in iron, because after 6 months of age the infant is unable to obtain adequate iron from breast milk alone. There are several potential issues, however, with this early introduction of solid foods before 6 months. These can include an increased risk of food allergies, reduced milk production, increased vulnerability to food pathogens as the immune system is still developing in these infants, an increased load on the kidneys, and a greater risk of constipation due to poor digestion. Now, in terms of the food and nutrient intake of infants, data is limited. However, daily recommendations do exist as provided by the Australian Dietary Guidelines. These recommend that each day girls and boys aged 1 to 2 years consume 2 to 3 serves of vegetables and legumes, 0.5 serves of fruit, 4 serves of cereals and grains, 1 serve of lean meat, poultry, fish and alternatives, and 1 to 1.5 serves of dairy and alternatives. There is no allowance for additional serves of food in this age bracket, particularly including discretionary choices. To examine this, a study on food and beverage intake in Australian children aged 12 to 16 months was conducted. It found that 87% of children had eaten fruit and 77% had eaten vegetables on the day of the 24-hour recall. However, the type, quantity, and frequency of these fruit and vegetable consumption was not recorded. It also found that the most commonly consumed food groups were dairy and cereals. However, the meat and alternatives food group appeared to be problematic, with 22% of children consuming no foods from this core food group. Additionally, 91% had eaten discretionary items, and only 30% of children had consumed unsaturated fats and oils, with many reporting consumption of saturated fat products such as biscuits and butter. Furthermore, 19% consumed sugar-sweetened beverages, with 100% fruit juice being the most commonly consumed. Due to the limited data, it is difficult to draw conclusions about potential health implications. However, those who consume sugar-sweetened beverages may be at risk of diarrheal disease and dental caries, as well as becoming overweight, as these drinks contribute unnecessary kilojoules. Discretionary food intake was also an issue, given that there is no allowance in the diet for this additional energy, and hence may lead to an inadequate intake of other essential nutrients, increasing their risk of deficiency. It may also increase their risk of becoming overweight and obese, as these foods are typically energy dense. The low intake of meat and alternatives reported may be detrimental to the iron status of these children, increasing the risk of iron deficiency and iron deficiency anemia. Several infants also consume foods high in saturated fat, for example butter and biscuits, which if consumed regularly will raise LDL cholesterol levels and raise the risk of heart disease long term. Furthermore, the low intake of unsaturated fats and oils may be problematic, since these fats are essential for neurological development and brain function during infancy, and may help to reduce risk factors for heart disease in later life. So to sum all this up, meeting the nutritional requirements in infancy is very important. Evidence on breastfeeding suggests that rates are much lower than optimal, given the potential health benefits of this practice. However, rates are beginning to rise with increased public knowledge on the benefits of breastfeeding, such as reduced risk of infections, asthma, allergy, diabetes, including both type 1 and type 2, gastrointestinal diseases such as celiac disease and irritable bowel disease, and overweight and obesity, just to name a few. Many infants begin consuming solid foods prior to the recommended 6 months, which may be detrimental to health. For example, it may increase the risk of food allergies, reduce breast milk production, and result in constipation. In terms of actual food intake, data is limited, but suggests that infants are consuming more saturated fat, sugar-sweetened beverages, and discretionary food choices than what's recommended. This may increase the risk of overweight and obesity, diarrheal disease, dental caries, nutritional deficiency, and heart disease. Inadequate intake of meat and alternatives and healthy fats were also reported, which could have implications on iron status, heart disease risk, and brain development. It is therefore important to follow age-specific recommendations on food and nutrient intake, such as the Australian Dietary Guidelines. In concluding, this presentation has made one thing clear, that there are major research gaps in this area for infant nutrition, which desperately need to be filled, given the strong link between the intake of food and nutrients consumed in infancy and the strong link to chronic disease in adulthood. Thank you all for listening.